Mr. Trudeau always forgets one fact. He has never made a target for climate change.
They are promising jobs. They should be promising workers.
How is it that the experts that have rated our plan on climate to be an A have rated your plan to be an F?
Mr. O'Toole and Mr. Trudeau are jumping over each other about who is going to cut help to people first.
I have said before, and I'll say again tonight, that I do not believe that Mr. Trudeau is a real feminist.
To you, Mr. Trudeau, you plunged the country into an election even as the pandemic spurs thousands of new cases. But over the last 18 months, opposition parties have largely stood with you, putting the nation above politics. Why aren't you doing the same? How can you justify an election at this time?
Tonight, over the next couple of hours, you're going to hear some very, very different, very strong ideas that are radically different about how we're going to move forward through this pandemic to end it, how we're going to build back better. Those decisions are going to be taken by your government now, in the coming weeks, this fall, not a year from now, not 2 years from now.
Could it not have waited a few months, Mr. Trudeau?
I know you want to go harder and faster on vaccinations. I know you want to go harder and faster on climate change, and you get to choose exactly that in this election.
Mr. Blanchet, to you. You deny that Quebec has problems with racism, yet you defend legislation such as Bills 96 and 21, which marginalize religious minorities, Anglophones, and allophones. Quebec is recognized as a distinct society, but for those outside the province, please help them understand why your party also supports these discriminatory laws.
The question seems to imply the answer you want. Those laws are not about discrimination. They are about the values of Quebec.
And yet religious minorities, sir, cannot progress.
We are saying that those are legitimate laws that apply on Quebec territory, and there seems to be people around here who will share this point of view, which is a gain by itself for Quebec.
Mr. Trudeau, you call yourself a feminist, but on your watch, sexual misconduct in Canada's armed forces continues to run rampant. Tell me, why are you allowing these unacceptable conditions to continue?
Yes, these problems continue in workplaces across the country, particularly in the military. That's unacceptable, which is why we've taken even stronger measures.
I have said before, and I'll say again tonight, that I do not believe that Mr. Trudeau is a real feminist. A feminist doesn't continue to push strong women out of his party when they are just seeking to serve. And I will say their names tonight and thank them. Thank you, Jane Philpott. Thank you, Jody Wilson-Raybould. Thank you, Selena Cesar-Chavez. And I'm here tonight thanks to the work that you have done.
Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor have been in Chinese prisons for 1,004 days. The next Prime Minister has key decisions to make about our already tense relationship with China, such as telecommunications security and foreign investment. Some say this all comes down to a trade-off between Canada's economic growth and recognition of human rights. I'd like to know where you all stand.
We have to do everything possible to secure the release of these two Canadians. We need to work with our allies, apply pressure, and make sure that we return these Canadians home. That's what we've got to do.
And that's exactly what we've been doing. Over the past 3 years, we have worked with international allies to put pressure on China in every single one of their meetings. We've worked closely with the United States. We, at the G7 a few weeks ago, worked with the international community to make sure we're moving forward on challenging China where necessary in human rights, competing with them economically where we need to, and holding them to account on the rule of law as a global community. And Canada's voice has been very strong on that.
Canada's voice has been absent, Mr. Trudeau. We have not worked with our allies on Huawei. We have not stood up for the 300,000 Canadians in Hong Kong. We've not fought for the two Michaels and put pressure on the communist regime. We have not stood up for human rights. Sir, you did not show up for a vote declaring a genocide towards the Uyghur people. You didn't show up. We have a plan to meet our Paris targets, but minimize the impact on jobs and investment. We're also going to make major investments in electric vehicles, in the hydrogen economy, small modular reactors. There is so much we can do to get our emissions down, but grow a strong economy, because without a strong economy, we can't tackle climate change. We can't tackle the issues of today.
The reality that Mr. O'Toole has never understood is you can't have a strong economy unless you tackle climate change. And you ask about how we're going to convince the quarter of Canadians who still don't think climate change is real. Well, Mr. O'Toole can't even convince his party that climate change is real, because they voted against that. And that's perhaps why his plan is so weak. His plan is to go back to the Harper targets.
Mr. Trudeau always forgets one fact. He has never made a target for climate change. He has great ambition. That's part of the reason we're in an election and a pandemic, is his ambition. He doesn't have achievement. Well, he never meets his targets.
We have to deal in facts. And one of the facts I need to correct right now that everyone is laid into is we have not missed any of our targets. We are on track to exceeding our targets. And it's important that we are on facts. Secondly, I do have a question for Mr. Singh. We need to talk about science. We need to talk about experts. We agree on that, you and I both. So how is it that the experts that have rated our plan on climate to be an A have rated your plan to be an F?
You're talking about the future. Let's talk about right now. You had 6 years.
Why did you get
let me finish.
F
Let me
on
finish.
Climate?
You've got the worst track record in all the G7 after 6 years. How can people trust you?
Reconciliation is treated like a buffet. You can opt in for this, pick this plate, but not the other one. And that applies to what we've seen with Mr. Trudeau and the Liberals. You can't, on the one hand, say reconciliation and then go and not allow Mi'kmaq fishers to be able to have a decent, moderate living for all of these years. You can't call reconciliation and then take Indigenous peoples to court. But Mr. Singh, you also can't say reconciliation and then support the NDP government in putting pipelines through Indigenous territories, or support Line 5 after the Anishinaabe made it very clear that they did not support that project.
I want to go back to what Mr. O'Toole has been saying, because he's very able at saying all the right things, but there are countless examples of him actually not living up to his words. We've seen him on a number of times during this campaign, but on Indigenous issues specifically, he says we need to listen to Indigenous peoples. Well, he proposed that he would raise the flags that are at half-mast for the kids in unmarked graves in residential schools. And he didn't talk to or listen to any Indigenous leaders when he made that decision.
So as Prime Minister, on the National Day of Reconciliation on September 30th, I will raise the flag with a commitment to move forward on calls to action. Mr. Trudeau promises things, doesn't deliver, and then when people protested him, he mocked them. That is not reconciliation. So you can be proud of your country as you strive for it to get better.
Thank you, Mr. O'Toole. Mr. Singh.
What is one policy change that you think would make the biggest difference to Canadians or Quebecers, in your case, in terms of their cost of living?
We believe that the most important thing is changing the way we create wealth. We believe that transforming our own resources, natural resources, with our own clean energy in our regions of Quebec will create more wealth. This wealth will come from an environmental, I will get this word, environmental preoccupation as well. And we will do that, and we should be entitled to do that with our part of the money that is being sent again and again in oil and gas.
The cost of living has gone up. The cost of medication is going up. The cost of being able to afford the medication that keeps you healthy. Mr. Trudeau, $0 in your fully costed budget means zero commitment to getting it done.
You don't have a fully costed
$0, but you've shown your evidence. With your costed budget, you've shown Canadians clearly you've got no interest in doing something that you promised to do
in your
2 years ago.
Mr. Singh.
You promised to do it 2 years ago. You committed, you campaigned on it, you included it in your throne speech, and now you've completely abandoned it. How can people trust any promise you make when there's $0 in your plan?
Okay, brief response, then Ms. Paul, then I'm coming to you, Mr. O'Toole. Briefly, Mr.
$25
billion in our fully costed platform for health for the priorities that Canadians have told us on. Better support for seniors in care, better support for mental health services across the country, particularly for young people, and access to a primary care doctor or team. That is what $25 billion over the next 4 years gives.
The biggest thing that could make a difference in the cost of living for people is a change in the culture in Ottawa, because there are several parties on this platform right now that agree on guaranteed livable income and universal pharmacare and childcare, but it's always soon come.
$1 per hour raise for working families. These are people working very hard, and I respect whether they get up to work a shift in a restaurant or work to open their small business. We're going to have your back. We're also going to get costs down. We're the only party with a recovery plan that includes all Canadians. And when it comes to cynicism that Mr. Trudeau talked about earlier, all of the commitments continue to be a priority. He's going to get to the calls to action. He's going to have transparency. He's going to make targets. He announces things and never delivers.
We were able to lift 1 million people out of poverty and create
That's
1 million
not a policy.
jobs at the same time with the right kinds of investments over the past 5 years.
During the pandemic, Canadians watched in horror the suffering of their most vulnerable and frail loved ones in long-term care. What if tomorrow you had to place a family member in a long-term care facility?
We propose to hire 50,000 new personal support workers working with the provinces with the money for that. Also increasing the minimum salary to $25 an hour for people who care for our elders and most vulnerable. Because
so if you
we
had
know
to put
that
mom in
happens.
long-term care, you would do it?
I would make sure that, yes, that they are people who are properly well cared and that there is enough of a proportionate.
Mr.
And that's where we will work with the provinces to deliver exactly that.
Learning from the gaps in the first part of this pandemic is something we need. And I have to address...
Would you put a loved one in long-term care tomorrow,
Absolutely. I have
Mr.
a
O'Toole?
grandmother in one,
All right.
and we've been in touch with her. But I have to touch on what Mr. Trudeau said about the recovery. We have to get through the pandemic first. Why did you not have that approach to the election, Mr. Trudeau? We're in the fourth wave. Everything in the recovery relates to getting out of the pandemic first.
Some dads and some moms don't have to worry. They will have the money, of course. Some do. And in order to give them the care they need, the care they deserve, those responsible for those cares, provinces and Quebec, should have, without conditions, because it is their responsibility, their knowledge, their expertise, the resources required. When the Army came in Quebec, they wrote a report afterward. What did they say? They did not say Quebec is not good enough to take care of its seniors. They said they lacked resources.
The pandemic recovery is about the future path of Canada. What specific programs will stay and what will go in the next year, and who will pay for all of this?
We didn't see the government adapt to the changing crisis. What we supported, and we all worked together, the wage subsidy, the CERB, needed to be adapted as there were labor shortages in Quebec, as we can't find enough people for restaurants and service industries. We need to target the highly impacted sectors. That's what our plan, Canada's Recovery Plan, does. We get those service, tourism, restaurants back on their feet, get people working, and with keeping cases low, we can then wind down the other programs because we need to focus on work. We have a job boost that will actually incentivize the hiring of people that have been out of work for 10 months or more.
Mr. O'Toole and Mr. Trudeau are jumping over each other about who's going to cut help to people first. I don't agree with that approach. I don't think it makes sense to say, oh, I'm going to have people's back, but I'm going to cut as quickly as I can. I'm going to cut the help to people who need it as much as they can. We're the only party right here clearly is going to say to you, you're not going to have to pay more. We're not going to cut any programs.
Leaders, thank you for your participation tonight. That's it for the English Language Leaders Debate. Voting Day is September 20th. Get your ballots. Make sure you're registered.